the changes Council put forward. And that is a summary of historic heritage. More detail, as always, in terms of Council's evidence, the evidence from all of the submitters on the panel website, topics 31 and 32.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, just remind me, we had a resolution of council that we wanted to see the retention of the Women's Suffrage Memorial in Khartoum Place retained in perpetuity. I know that the National Council for Women submitted on the unitary plan asking for it to be scheduled. My question is that one of the new places that council have asked to be scheduled? And if not, why not?
It is still on the schedule. There was evidence given on that place by council. There was some disagreement about the category of that place, but it remains on the schedule and we're proposing it's a category B place.
Thank you so much.
Good. Any other questions? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, in a situation where we've got, say, some buildings in a street in their heritage, and then other buildings go for one reason or another. That's good. And we've got these new, site setbacks, 3 metres and the like. We could have a situation where the streetscape is quite jumbled. Is that something that we've considered as it goes to, the earlier conversation around site setback and character and so on?
I think where there's areas where we're wanting to retain a cohesiveness of the character of the area, they are being scheduled as historic heritage areas, or the historic character provisions which overlay. There's separate rules and provisions within that to address some of those matters.
So, just jumping the gun, does it mean, say, in a historic character area, even though the building's been removed, that the new building that goes in might have to fit in terms of some kind of setback or the like?
Yeah, I think this will be discussed at the historic character and pre-1944 presentation as well, but okay. Yes, there's a short answer to that.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions on this? That's great. Thank you. It's hard work. Yeah. Shall we do a sustainable design? Okay. Right. So we'll move on to sustainable design, and we may then have to carry over. Well, let's just see how we go. Let's do sustainable design. Right, so we're just popping back to page it is.
I'd just like to welcome our experts, Tim Robinson from JASMAX and Anthony Traub in our unitary plan unit. So, topic is sustainable design. So we'll start again at the regional policy statement. There are 2 key policy planks for the sustainable design rules in the unitary plan sitting at the regional policy statement level. The first one is in terms of the quality of the built environment. It sits under the urban growth part of the regional policy statement. An objective there about recognising sustainable design as a means of addressing environmental effects and maximising resource and infrastructure efficiency. So that's the key objective in terms of the quality built environment policy plank in the regional policy statement, and the related policy is managing development to minimise its environmental impact through best practice sustainable design, which may include energy efficiency, waste minimisation and water sensitive design. I don't think there should be a comma between waste and minimisation. So that's the first key policy plank. The second one is in terms of climate change. So there is a section in the regional policy statement around climate change. Objective 1, Auckland increases renewable energy use and maximises resource efficiency and conservation, which will reduce emissions that contribute to the adverse effects of climate change. That's the objective in the regional policy statement. How does that relate to sustainable design? Well, there's a policy there that increasing energy efficiency, the use of renewable energy and carbon sinks to contribute to the mitigation of adverse effects of climate change achieved by requiring, and this is the key, policy, in the regional policy statement, all large-scale development and encouraging all development to achieve best practice sustainable design. So that was the approach in the regional policy statement. When we, now sort of getting down into the rules, in the notified plan, there are citywide sustainable design provisions. In terms of dwellings, there was a requirement that all new developments with 5 or more dwellings had to achieve a minimum 6-star rating under the New Zealand Green Building Council Homestar tool. There was an alternative approach that you could apply for, but you had to pay a resource consent fee and go through a resource consent process and argue why you wanted to depart from the NZGBC Homestar tool. But it was available, but it would come at a cost to someone if they wanted to go down that alternative path. Office and industrial buildings, where they had a gross floor area greater than 5,000 or 5,000 square metres or greater, they had to achieve a 4-star rating under the NZGBC Green Star Office and Industrial Tools. Again, you could apply for an alternative approach and argue your sustainable design approach through a resource consent process. So submitters fell into 2 main camps: those that wanted to remove the sustainable design rules. The key reasons included that sustainable design is something that should be addressed by central government through the Building Act and the Building Code, not under the RMA. The cost of achieving sustainable design requirements is simply too high and is creating an additional burden in terms of house prices in Auckland. The market's already delivering sustainable design for office buildings, so why would the council have a regulation that's simply not required? Cost of delivering sustainable design for office and industrial buildings is much higher than for dwellings, so it might sound good in theory, but the actual reality of it is that it comes at a significant cost, and in some cases prohibitive in terms of development, and sustainable design outcomes should be optional for developers. So that's the camp that thought that they should be deleted. Those that wanted to retain them as notified or expand them, their reasons were the low quality of many new buildings, especially dwellings, in relation to energy efficiency is a big problem in Auckland and beyond. Sustainable design can be delivered at minimal cost. Sustainable design will achieve significant environmental, economic, health benefits and social benefits. Auckland's expecting a large number of houses to be built over the next 30 years, so now's a huge opportunity to make sure our housing stock is well designed. And sustainable design is being successfully delivered in many places overseas through regulation in some cases, so why wouldn't Auckland have some regulations around sustainable design? We had some interim guidance from the panel after the regional policy statement hearing. They felt that the objects and policies should promote diversity, innovation and choice in building design, but they were concerned that some of the district plan provisions, i.e. the rules, didn't give effect to these because they were overly detailed and restrictive. Some of that related back to the wider residential rules that we've talked about. The panel considered that this would need to be addressed in later topics, including residential and sustainable design rules. And the panel was concerned about, I felt that there should be a specific definition for terms like sustainable design and water-sensitive design that they were seeing. So this was very early on in the process. I don't think that date's correct. I think that date's probably 2015, because the RPS hearings finished in March 2015. Okay, so what was the council's position at the hearings? So this is brought through committee to confirm the council's position. Deletion of sustainable design requirements for office and industrial buildings, and I guess that's just off the back of evidence in terms of office that the market is already delivering sustainably designed office buildings. Particularly, our threshold was 5,000 square metres, so most office buildings above 5,000 square metres are being designed to achieve that 4-star rating or an equivalent form of sustainable design. And in terms of industrial buildings, the requirements under the Green Building Council, there was quite a bit of evidence, and our experts generally agreed that the office tool still needs more work and is potentially overly complicated and expensive in some cases. But in terms of residential, Council's position was the opposite direction. So Council proposed at the hearings that rather than it being a trigger of 5 or more dwellings, any new dwelling, so even a single new house, would have to achieve the 6-star rating or comply with a list of specific standards in terms of construction and design. So that option of complying with the list provides the flexibility without having to go through the Homestar process and without having to go through a resource consent. So a big challenge to the Council's approach in the proposed plan was that you would have to pay for experts and a resource consent if you wanted to depart from the New Zealand Green Building Council Homestar tool. So we found a way forward that's one option, comply with the tool for all dwellings, or alternatively for all dwellings you could meet a menu of standards, things like double glazing and construction materials, and Tim can answer any questions if you want to know the specific requirements. And there was no need to define sustainable design. In mediation, almost all parties agreed that the policy that the Council had in the regional policy statement encapsulates what sustainable design is all about. So we didn't agree with the panel in terms of our approach at the hearings. So that's sustainable design in a nutshell.
Questions? Councillor Quax.
Did the panel offer any thoughts, or did any of the submitters, I suppose, provide thoughts on whether, in fact, it adds to the cost of housing in the short term? It may in the long term, it may be an advantage, but you know, a lot of people are buying on price, and especially in an Auckland market where housing is priced very highly. So was there much discussion around how much this might add to the cost of a house?
Certainly there was. That issue was recognised and addressed. The Council's Section 32 report had a substantial cost study in it for that reason, and the discussion was raised as to how much of an impact that would be on affordability. The long-term issue was recognised, that it is worth it in terms of upfront investment and payback in a very commonly understood, widely assessed framework. And it was essentially the Council's work put it into context as to what that capital cost was as a percentage of the upfront. Yeah. What was also recognised was, in discussion with the panel, was that the panel actually interestingly asked many of the submitters against the proposed regulations what their views were and what their individual experience was of building a house. Many interestingly, who chose to spoke had built a house recently. And a lot of discussion focused on the fact that where individual builders have a degree of control over the house they're going to live in, i.e. if you're an owner-occupier and you're procuring a builder to build it, virtually every person who was asked that question in the hearing said, I chose to go well above building code. And the point that we were making as council was there may be some upfront costs, but what we're doing there is representing the interests of many people who do not have that direct control, and that in many cases developers choose to cut the very things that individual homeowners will choose to have, because there is no direct feedback in the market loop between purchasers and the supply that's being provided.
Yeah, I suspect that at some point there's a price impediment.
Correct.
To how much somebody's prepared to pay for those extras, which they would see as extras. So it's an interesting one, because it certainly, to some extent, while in the long-term benefits are there, the short-term benefits on which people are making decisions to buy it doesn't help doesn't help affordable housing.
That's interesting. Shall we say that? Yeah.
Well, Tim might be able to comment. There was analysis done on the typical cost of complying with the 6-star rating for a single dwelling was about 6,000 over the cost of a code-compliant building?
Correct. So that was a study in 2013, and the costs at the time were around 6,000, and that was about 2% or so on the build cost at the time, and probably in terms of selling price, that would be around 1% when you look at the typical prices at the time for selling and for building relative to each other.
Okay. By the time you've built it 2 weeks later, you would have made it back, tragically. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, a couple of questions. First off, just around this approach, comply with the list of sustainable building standards